The sun hadn't cleared the Georgia pines yet, but Fort Benning was already alive. Boots crunched on gravel. Cadence calls snapped through the humid air. Metal rang as weapons were checked, cleared, checked again. Another morning. Another batch of young men being pressed, shaped, hardened into something the army could use. Elina Crawford watched it all from outside the main gate, her gaze fixed through the chain-link fence like she was studying an old scar, 45 years old, 5'6". Brown hair pulled back tight, civilian tactical pants and a long sleeve Henley the color of sand. In a Georgia July, long sleeves drew attention. They were supposed to. Her paperwork read, Duty Civilian Contractor, Advanced Combat Instruction. The guard had read it twice. Then he'd looked at her, then back at the paper, brow furrowed like the pieces didn't quite line up. "You can head to the training command building, ma'am," he'd finally said. "Master Sergeant Brennan's expecting you." She'd nodded. Waited for the gate, stepped through. Now on the other side of the fence, she inhaled deeply. Gun oil, fresh cut grass, sweat, the sharp, honest kind that came from bodies pushed past comfort into capability. A memory flickered. Different country, different heat. She shut it down. The training command building stood exactly where it always had. Some things never moved. Elina crossed the threshold and walked straight into air conditioning that hit like a punch. Master Sergeant Marcus Brennan looked up from behind his desk. 44, thick-built, solid, like Georgia clay shaped by pressure and baked hard under sun. A pale scar ran from his left temple to his jaw. His eyes were winter cold, assessing, unforgiving. "You're late," he said, not hostile, just testing. She glanced at the wall clock. "It's 5:58. Brief was at 600. A muscle jumped in his jaw. "You the consultant they sent." "I'm who they sent." He stood and took his time looking her over, measuring, cataloging, judging. The look. She'd seen it 1,000 times in 100 places. Men always thought it was original. "Hope you can keep up, ma'am." The word ma'am was polished enough to pass inspection and sharp enough to cut. "This isn't a PowerPoint seminar." Understood. Alpha companies waiting, fresh out of basic, think they know everything. He paused, then added, flat and unimpressed, "You're here to observe advanced combat training and provide feedback on curriculum development." He didn't believe a word of it. "That work for you?" "That works." "Good." He grabbed his cover. "Don't get in the way." He passed close enough for her to catch the scent of coffee and the same soap the military had been issuing for decades. Elina followed him into the rising heat. "Quick pause before we continue. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world right now, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell because tomorrow's episode, it goes even deeper than this. The training yard was red Georgia clay baked hard as concrete. Alpha Company stood in loose formation, 24 of them, 18 to 22 years old. Fresh faces still carrying that civilian softness around the edges. They'd lose it one way or another. When Elina walked into the yard behind Brennan, the talking stopped, then started again, quieter. The kind of whispers that think they're subtle but carry anyway. "That's the consultant. Looks like somebody's mom. $10 she's gone by lunch." A tall kid with farm boy shoulders and sun-bleached hair nudged his buddy. Private First Class Travis Bennett, according to the name tape on his chest. "She going to teach us to shoot. My grandma's more intimidating." His friend laughed. Others joined in. Not cruel laughter, just the casual dismissal of young men who hadn't yet learned that appearances were the least reliable intel in the world. Elina heard every word. Her face showed nothing. She walked to the edge of the formation and stopped, relaxed posture, weight balanced, eyes forward. Her boots were dusty but planted firm on that hard red clay. Brennan's voice cracked like a whip. "Formation!" They snapped to attention, more or less. "This is Elina Crawford, civilian contractor. She's here to observe training. You will treat her with the same respect you'd treat any instructor. That clear?" "Yes, Sergeant." The response came ragged, not quite together. "Outstanding. We're running the standard PT assessment, push-ups, sprints, obstacle course." Brennan turned to Elina. His expression said he knew exactly what he was doing. Consultant wants to observe, she can observe by doing. A few snickers quickly suppressed. Elina said nothing, just moved into position at the end of the formation. Brennan smiled. It wasn't friendly. Begin. The first 100 push-ups separated the strong from the struggling. Bodies hit the clay, arms shook, breath came hard and desperate. Elina moved through them like water, controlled, economical, no wasted motion. Her form was textbook perfect, but that wasn't what caught attention. It was the breathing, steady, unchanging, like she was pulling oxygen from some reserve the rest of them couldn't access. By push-up 73, recruits had dropped out. By 97, more were struggling. Elina finished 100 and stood up, not breathing hard, not even flushed. The whispers started again. Different tone now. Sprints came next. 400 meters, full combat load, 35 pounds of gear on bodies that weren't used to carrying it yet. They ran like their lives depended on it, which someday they might. Elina ran different. No wasted energy. Stride length calculated for maximum efficiency. She didn't fight the gear. She moved with it, around it, like she'd been born wearing it. She finished 4th out of 24, behind 3 kids half her age who'd played football in high school and had lungs like bellows ahead of everyone else. Travis Bennett came in 9th. He wasn't smiling anymore, just watching Elina like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. But the real test was still coming, the obstacle course that would break everything wide open. The obstacle course was where it all came apart. Walls to scale, ropes to climb, trenches to crawl through, wire to navigate, designed to find your weakness and exploit it. Most of the recruits hit it like they were fighting a war. All aggression and determination and wasted strength. They slammed into walls, slipped off ropes, got tangled in wire. Their times ranged from 8 minutes to 12, with 2 unable to complete it at all. When Elina's turn came, she stood at the start line for exactly 3 seconds, just looking, reading the course like it was a language she spoke. Then she moved. Where they'd used strength, she used technique. Where they'd forced their way through, she found the path of least resistance. At the wall, she didn't jump for the top. She found handholds that seemed to appear under her fingers, placements that let her walk up the vertical surface like it was tilted. The rope climb was physics, not power. Feet locked in the proper J-hook configuration, using leg strength instead of burning out her arms. She was up and over in seconds. The crawl was where she showed something different. She moved like water, finding the lowest path, like someone who'd done this when being seen meant being shot. Fast but controlled, efficient to the point of eerie. The recruits watched from the finish line. The talking had stopped completely now. Elina crossed at 4 minutes and 18 seconds. The display board showed the previous record, 4 minutes, 41 seconds, set 3 years ago by a Ranger candidate who'd gone on to Special Forces. She walked to the water station, took one long drink, didn't say a word. Brennan stared at the board, then at Elina. Something had shifted in his eyes, not respect yet, but the absence of dismissal. "Water break," he called out. 10 minutes. The recruits scattered to the shade. Elina stayed in the sun, standing easy, letting her breathing settle. Through her long sleeves, sweat had started to darken the fabric. She reached up to wipe her forehead, and the sleeve pulled back slightly on her left arm. Travis Bennett was close enough to see it. Black ink, curved, serpentine, just the edge of something larger. He couldn't make out details, but his grandfather had tattoos like that. Military work, the real kind, professional, permanent. He said nothing, just filed it away and kept watching. What came next at the range would change everything they thought they knew. The range was next. Live fire qualification. M4 carbines, 50-meter targets, standard military shooting. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, just the difference between competent and dangerous. The recruits took their positions, loaded magazines, assumed firing stances that ranged from adequate to atrocious. When Brennan gave the command, they opened up. Rounds snapped downrange, targets jerked and swayed, but the groupings told the real story. Shots scattered wide, high, low. The kind of shooting that might hit something in a phone booth if you were lucky. One by one, they cleared their weapons and stepped back. Targets were checked, scores recorded, most barely qualified. A few would need remedial training. Then it was Elina's turn. She walked to the line, accepted the M4 from the range safety officer. And then she did something none of them had done. She inspected it, not the quick press check they'd all learned in basic, real inspection. She dropped the magazine, locked the bolt back, visually and physically confirmed the chamber was clear, checked the bore for obstructions, released the bolt, dry fired twice to test the trigger, reloaded, charged the weapon, applied the safety. The whole sequence took maybe 15 seconds, but every movement was deliberate, practiced to the point of muscle memory. The kind of handling that spoke of thousands of hours, not dozens. She moved to the firing line, adjusted her stance. Not much, maybe an inch to the left, a slight cant to her shoulders. Her support hand position shifted forward on the handguard, exactly where modern techniques taught but most people ignored. "Ready on the left," the RSO called. "Ready on the right, ready on the firing line. Shooters, you may fire when ready." Elina's first shot broke the silence with a sharp crack that echoed off the far berm. Center mass, perfect. Second shot, same hole, near enough. Third shot. The target now had one ragged hole where the center of mass used to be. She safed the weapon, locked the bolt back, grounded it, stepped away. The range had gone completely quiet. Not even the wind made sound. Then someone laughed, nervous, defensive. "Lucky shots. She probably practices at some civilian range all day." The whispers started again, but they were thinner now. Trying to rebuild the wall they'd built around their assumptions, trying to explain away what they'd just seen. Brennan walked to the line, stood next to Elina. His voice carried across the entire range. "Crawford, explain the shot." Elina looked at him, then at the recruits. Her voice was level, calm, the tone of someone stating facts that didn't need emphasis. "M4 carbine, 14.5-inch barrel, 5.56 NATO M855 ammunition. Muzzle velocity 2970 feet per second. At 50 meters, bullet drop is approximately 4 inches, negligible for center mass targeting." She paused. "Current wind is 6 miles per hour from the northwest. That adds 1.1 inches of drift to the right. I compensated by holding left edge of center mass." Nobody moved. "Trigger pull on this particular weapon is approximately 5.8 pounds. I felt the break point at 5.5, controlled the surprise. Maintained follow-through for 0.3 seconds after the shot broke. Standard technique." She said it like she was explaining how to tie boots. Simple, factual, unremarkable. But the recruits heard something else. This wasn't someone who'd read a manual. This was someone who'd done the math so many times it was automatic, instinctive, the kind of knowledge that only came from necessity. Travis Bennett was writing in a small notebook he'd pulled from his cargo pocket, every word, every number. Brennan nodded once. Return to formation. But the afternoon heat would bring something that would shatter every assumption they'd built and reveal a secret that had been buried for 28 years. The afternoon heat was building toward oppressive when they moved to hand-to-hand combat training. A sand pit behind the main training building, worn mats that had seen 1,000 bodies hit them. The smell of sweat and dust and the particular fear that comes before controlled violence. Brennan demonstrated basic defensive techniques, weapon retention, disarming, control holds. He was good, 22 years in service, multiple deployments. He knew what worked and what got you killed. "I need a volunteer," he said. Elina stepped forward. The recruits perked up. This might be entertaining. Brennan handed her a rubber training knife. "Attack me, any method, try to kill me." She looked at the knife, then at him. "Any method, any method." What happened next took 4 seconds. Elina moved, not fast enough to be flashy, just efficient. She feinted high with the knife, and when Brennan's hands came up to defend, she changed levels, dropped low, swept his lead leg, used his own reaction to pull him off balance. He went down, not hard controlled, but down. Before he could recover, Elina had transitioned. Knee on his chest, rubber blade at his throat, her other hand controlling his right arm in a lock that would snap the elbow if she applied pressure. Then she stopped. Released. Up, offered her hand. Brennan took it, let her help him up. His expression was carefully neutral, but something had changed behind his eyes. Technique, he asked. Redirection of force, used your defensive reaction to create the opening, attacked structure, not strength, controlled the fall to avoid injury. She handed back the knife. Standard close quarters methodology. Standard for who exactly? That was the question nobody asked, but everyone thought. Brennan dismissed them to formation. The recruits moved, but slower now, quieter. The easy mockery had evaporated like water on hot Georgia clay. Elina walked back to her position at the edge of the formation. As she moved, her sleeve pulled up again, just for a moment, just enough. Travis saw it clearly this time. Black ink, professional work, the curve of a serpent's body, the edge of what might be a blade, military tattoo, not the kind you got on a weekend in some strip mall parlor, the kind that meant something. He filed it away with everything else. The shooting, the obstacle course, the way she moved in hand-to-hand combat. Pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite see yet. The sun was past its peak when everything changed, when a ghost from the past walked into the training yard and spoke 5 words that would crack open a secret buried for nearly 3 decades. The sun was past its peak when everything changed. No announcement, no ceremony, just the sudden stiffening of Brennan's spine as he came to attention. The recruits scrambled to follow suit. Colonel Harrison Vaughn walked into the training yard like he owned it, which in every way that mattered he did. 68 years old. Silver hair cut to regulation, ramrod posture that spoke of 5 decades in uniform. His eyes were pale blue and sharp enough to cut. He didn't look at Brennan, didn't acknowledge the formation, just walked to a position 40 yards from where Elina stood and stopped. Then he watched, not casual observation. Not idle curiosity, focused attention, the kind that sees past surfaces into structure. He watched Elina move through the next drill, a refresher on tactical movement, fire and maneuver, bounding Overwatch basic infantry work. Elina demonstrated proper technique, how to move under fire, how to use terrain, how to maintain intervals. She moved like water, like wind, like someone who'd learned these lessons when the stakes were life and death. Vaughn watched all of it. His expression gave nothing away, but he didn't blink, didn't look away, didn't move. 10 minutes of absolute stillness, just watching. When the drill ended, he walked forward, directly toward Elina. His boots struck the clay with measured precision. The yard went quiet. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to maintain formality. "Roll up your left sleeve." Not a request, a statement. 5 words that carried the weight of command authority and something else underneath. Something that sounded like recognition. Elina hesitated, just 1 second, a flicker of something in her eyes that might have been respect or might have been resignation. Then she reached down and began rolling up the sleeve of her Henley, the fabric pulled back inch by inch. The tattoo revealed itself like a secret being forced into daylight. A serpent, black ink, faded slightly by time but still sharp in execution. Coiled around a cob bar fighting knife. The snake's body wrapped the blade from guard to tip. Its head was raised, forward-facing, fangs bared, ready to strike. Professional work, military precision, the kind of tattoo that wasn't decoration, it was documentation. Vaughn leaned closer. His voice dropped, not quite a whisper, but low enough that only the nearest recruits and instructors could hear. "That's a black viper mark." The effect was immediate. Brennan's face went pale. The senior NCOs exchanged glances, sharp, meaningful, weighted with knowledge the recruits didn't have. The recruits themselves just looked confused. Black Viper, what was that? Some unit patch, some special school? But the men who'd been in longer knew better. They'd heard rumors, stories told in the dark spaces between deployments, whispers about programs that didn't officially exist, operators who didn't officially operate. Vaughn straightened, turned to face the formation. His voice carried across the entire yard, now clear, authoritative, leaving no room for doubt. You've been laughing at someone who passed trials most of you will never even hear about. He let that sink in. That mark isn't ink, it's a receipt, paid in blood and silence. Someone started to speak. Vaughn raised one finger. Silence snapped back into place like a physical force. He looked at Elina. Where did you earn it? Elina's voice was level. No pride, no shame, just fact. Kuwait, Iraq border. February 1991. The math hit them like cold water. 1991, 28 years ago, the first Gulf War, Desert Storm. Travis Bennett's hand went up slowly. Vaughn nodded at him. Sir, that would mean, ma'am would have been 17, Elina said. The silence was absolute now. You could have heard a pin drop on that hard clay and it would have sounded like thunder. But what Colonel Vaughn said next would reveal a truth so devastating, so impossible, that it would change everything these young soldiers thought they understood about warfare and about the woman standing before them. A 17-year-old girl, in combat, in Iraq, during Desert Storm. It was impossible. It was insane. It violated every regulation and protocol and common sense rule in the book. But that tattoo was real, and Vaughn believed her. And something in the way she stood, in the way she moved, in the quiet competence that surrounded her like an aura, said it was true. Vaughn turned back to the formation. Black Viper Program, 1987 to 2003, CIA Dudi Joint Operation, 16 years of operation, 97 operators went in over that time period. He paused, let them absorb the numbers. 31 came out alive. You could feel the weight of that. 66 dead over 16 years. Odds that made Special Forces selection look like a pleasant walk. The program was classified above top secret. Operators worked in cells, deep penetration missions, zero footprint, zero support. If you were compromised, you were on your own. Vaughn's eyes swept the formation. The kind of people who made it through that program aren't the ones who talk about it. They're the ones who do the work and walk away. He looked at Elina. Where exactly? Kuwait City, occupied territory. Intelligence extraction and network disruption. She said it like she was reciting a grocery list. 6-person team, 3 came back. Who was your team leader? Major Rebecca Summers. Something flickered across Vaughn's face, brief, quickly controlled. But there, he nodded once, turned back to the recruits. Training resumes, watch how she moves. If you're smart, you'll learn. Then he walked away, didn't wait for salutes, didn't look back. Just walked across that yard and disappeared into the command building like a ghost dissolving into daylight. The formation stood frozen, processing, trying to reconcile what they'd thought they knew with what they'd just learned. Brennan's voice cracked out. You heard the colonel. Training resumes. Move. They moved, but everything was different now. The rest of the afternoon unfolded like a fever dream. Orders came faster. Standards climbed impossibly high. And whenever someone faltered, Elina was there, not standing over them, not barking corrections, just present, showing them how, demonstrating technique without words, making the impossible look achievable through pure economy of motion. A recruit's M4 jammed during live fire. He froze, panic written across his face. Elina appeared at his shoulder like smoke. What do you feel? Her voice was quiet, calm. It's stuck, ma'am, I can't. Failure to eject or failure to feed? I don't know. Feel it, the bolt didn't lock back. That's failure to eject. Spent casing caught in the chamber. What's the immediate action drill? The recruit's training kicked in through the panic. Tap, rack, assess. Show me. He tapped the magazine, ensured it was seated, racked the charging handle. The spent casing ejected. He assessed, weapon ready. Good, now continue. No praise, no criticism, just acknowledgement that he'd done what needed doing, but something in his face changed. Confidence replacing panic. At the obstacle course, a smaller recruit kept failing the wall. 5'4", maybe 130. He tried to jump, missed the top, slid back down again and again. Frustration building toward rage. Elina walked over, stood at the base of the wall, looked up at it for a moment. You're fighting it, she said. Ma'am. The wall doesn't care how strong you are, it just exists. You need to work with it, not against it, she pointed. See that irregularity 3 feet up left side? That's your first hold. Right foot there, left hand there, don't pull yourself up, step up. Use your legs, they're stronger than your arms. She demonstrated, slow, breaking down each movement, showing him the micro holds he'd been missing, the technique that replaced strength with efficiency. He tried again, made it halfway before slipping. Again. This time he made it 3/4. On the 4th attempt, he went over the top, dropped down on the other side, stood there breathing hard, looking at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Elina had already moved on to the next person who needed help. By the time the sun started its descent toward the pines, every recruit in Alpha Company had learned something. Not from being told, from being shown. From watching someone who made excellence look like the natural state of being. But as the day ended, one question burned in every recruit's mind, and one young soldier was about to risk everything to get answers about the woman who'd survived what killed 66 others. The water break at 1600 hours found them scattered in the shade, exhausted, drinking like they'd been in the desert for a week. Elina stood in the sun, always in the sun, long sleeves still covering her arms despite the heat that had to be pushing 100 degrees. Travis Bennett watched her from the shade, writing in his notebook. He'd filled 4 pages with observations, techniques, details, things she'd said that sounded simple but carried layers underneath. She caught him looking. Didn't smile, didn't frown, just a brief moment of eye contact that seemed to see more than it should. Then Brennan called them back to formation. Secure weapons, return to barracks, chow at 17:30, dismissed. They scattered, talking now, not laughing, talking, processing, trying to make sense of what they'd witnessed. Brennan approached Elina, stopped at a respectful distance. "Ma'am, need a word?" She nodded. He waited until the recruits were out of earshot. "That thing the colonel said, Black Viper. That's real? Yes. You were really 17. Yes. In Kuwait during Desert Storm. Yes." He was quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. "I've been in 22 years, Iraq, Afghanistan, 2 Bronze Stars. I thought I'd seen the real operators, SEALs, Delta Rangers, the quiet professionals." He looked at the tattoo, still visible below her rolled sleeve. "But I've never heard of Black Viper, not once, not even rumors. That means it worked. What did?" The silence. Brennan nodded slowly. "You didn't have to come here, you could be doing anything. Why this? Why now?" Elina looked past him toward the barracks, toward the recruits disappearing into the building. Young men who thought they understood what they were getting into. "Someone asked me to," she said. "Someone who understood what it means to keep a promise." "Who?" "Major Rebecca Summers, my team leader in 91. She survived that mission, paralyzed from the waist down, lived 23 more years before she died. She asked me to do this, to teach the next generation what silence looks like." "Silence?" Elina finally looked at him. "Not aggression, not bravado, silent competence, the kind that proves itself without announcement, the kind that keeps people alive." Brennan was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. "Understood, ma'am. Thank you for being here." She inclined her head slightly, professional courtesy between professionals. He walked away. Elina stood alone in the training yard as the sun painted the Georgia sky in shades of fire. She looked down at her left arm, at the tattoo that had been hidden for so long and was now exposed. The Black Viper, the serpent and the blade, the mark that meant she'd paid a price most people couldn't imagine. She rolled her sleeve back down, covering it again, hiding it from casual view. But the secret was out now. The whisper had been spoken. And tomorrow, when the sun rose again over Fort Benning, everything would be different. She walked toward the parking lot, toward the civilian vehicle she'd driven in that morning. The recruits would be talking tonight, processing. Some would doubt, some would believe, some would start paying attention in ways they hadn't before. That was fine. That was the point. Major Summers had understood something fundamental, that the loudest operators were rarely the most dangerous. That true capability walked quietly. That the deadliest people in the world were the ones you didn't notice until it was too late. Elina climbed into her truck, sat for a moment in the fading light, reached up and touched the brass compass that hung on a cord around her neck. Old, worn, the same compass she'd carried in Kuwait 28 years ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, new opportunities to show these young men what silent competence looked like. But tonight, she allowed herself one small moment of memory. Rebecca Summers' voice in her ear, calm, steady, guiding her through the dark. The quiet ones survive, Elina, remember that. The quiet ones survive. She started the engine and drove toward the gate, past the guard who'd checked her in that morning, past the fence that separated military from civilian, past the sign that read Fort Benning, home of the infantry. Behind her in the barracks, one soldier was about to make a discovery that would either validate everything they'd witnessed, or expose the most elaborate deception any of them had ever seen. Behind her in the barracks, Travis Bennett sat on his bunk and read through his notes. 4 pages of observations, techniques, numbers, details. At the bottom of the last page, he wrote one more line: watch her, learn from her. She knows something the rest of us don't. He closed the notebook, put it under his pillow, lay back on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he decided, he would pay even closer attention. Because if Colonel Vaughn believed her, if Master Sergeant Brennan respected her, if that tattoo was real and that story was true, then Elina Crawford wasn't just another instructor. She was a ghost from a war he'd only read about. A survivor of a program that shouldn't have existed. A living example of what it meant to be silent and deadly and still standing when everyone else had fallen. And if he was smart, if he learned what she had to teach, maybe he'd survive too. The sun set completely. Night claimed Fort Benning, and in the darkness, secrets older than the recruits who slept fitfully in their bunks kept their vigil, waiting for dawn, waiting for the next lesson, waiting for the moment when silent proof would speak louder than any words ever could. Morning came to Fort Benning the way it always did, sudden, unforgiving, the kind of wake-up that didn't care about your dreams or how little sleep you'd gotten. Travis Bennett was already awake when the lights snapped on. He'd been awake since 4:30, watching the darkness fade through the barracks windows, thinking about yesterday, about the tattoo, about the way Elina Crawford moved, about the numbers she'd rattled off like they were burned into her memory. 5.56 NATO. 2,970 feet per second. 1.1 inches of drift. The kind of knowledge that didn't come from reading. It came from necessity. He dressed quickly, checked his gear, made sure his notebook was in his cargo pocket. Today, he would pay attention to everything, every detail, every movement, every word. The rest of Alpha Company moved through morning routine with the kind of exhaustion that came from being physically broken down and mentally reconstructed. They were quieter than usual. The easy mockery from yesterday had evaporated. In its place was something harder to define. Respect, maybe, or fear, or that particular mixture of both that came from realizing you'd underestimated someone badly. By 600, they were formed up in the training yard. The sun was already climbing, promising another day of Georgia heat that would cook them inside their uniforms. Master Sergeant Brennan stood before them, ramrod straight, his scarred face unreadable. Today's focus is advanced marksmanship and tactical movement, he announced. You'll learn principles that separate adequate soldiers from effective ones. Pay attention, ask questions, execute with precision. He paused, looked toward the command building. Elina Crawford walked out into the sunlight. She wore the same type of outfit as yesterday, tactical pants, long-sleeve shirt despite the building heat, boots that had seen serious miles. But something was different. She wasn't hiding at the edge anymore. She walked directly to the front of the formation and stopped beside Brennan. Ms. Crawford will be conducting primary instruction today, Brennan said. His voice carried no skepticism now, just professional respect. You will listen, you will learn, you will execute. He stepped back, giving her the space, the authority. Elina looked at the assembled recruits. 24 faces, most of them still trying to process what they'd learned yesterday, still trying to reconcile the small woman in civilian clothes with the ghost from a war fought before they were born. Marksmanship at the advanced level isn't about repeating what you learned in basic, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, clear, precise. It's about understanding why those techniques work. Today we're going beyond the fundamentals. She picked up an M4 from the ready rack. You know this weapon fires at 2,970 feet per second. You know wind causes drift. But do you know how to read mirage to measure wind speed? How to use your reticle to estimate range when you don't have a rangefinder? How to compensate for shooting uphill when gravity works differently? Silence. They didn't. That's what we're learning today. The skills that separate qualification shooters from precision shooters. The knowledge that keeps you alive when your equipment fails and you have to rely on fundamental physics and fieldcraft. She gestured toward the range. Move out! For the next 2 hours, Elina Crawford would teach them things their training manuals never mentioned. Skills learned in places where mistakes weren't graded with scores, but measured in body counts. They moved to the firing line. Elina waited until they were positioned, weapons grounded, watching her. For the next 2 hours, she walked them through practical application. How to read wind using mirage through the scope, the way heat rising off the ground created visible distortion patterns. 1 mile per hour wind created minimal shimmer. 5 miles per hour created visible waves. 10 and above made the target dance. Your reticle has hash marks, she explained. Most of you ignore them. That's a mistake. Those marks represent precise angular measurements. If you know the size of your target, you can estimate range. Average human shoulder width is 18 inches. If that 18 inches fills exactly 1 milliradian of your reticle at unknown distance, basic trigonometry tells you the range. She demonstrated each concept, then made them demonstrate, correcting small errors, reinforcing good technique, never praising, never criticizing, just stating facts and showing them the way. Uphill and downhill shooting came next. Gravity acts perpendicular to the ground, she said. When you shoot uphill or downhill, the gravitational component affecting bullet drop is reduced. You need to aim lower than you think. A 30-degree uphill shot at 300 meters, gravity component is reduced by about 15%. Your actual ballistic distance is closer to 255 meters. Aim accordingly. She walked them through practice scenarios, shooting from elevated positions, compensating for angle, making the physics automatic through repetition. By 900, every recruit was shooting tighter groups than they'd ever shot before. Not because the rifle had changed, because they understood the system. Travis finished a 5-round group that measured 2 inches across at 50 meters. Yesterday, he would have been proud. Today, he knew it wasn't good enough. Elina could put 5 rounds through the same hole. He'd seen her do it. She appeared at his shoulder, looked at his target through the spotting scope. Wind compensation is off, she said quietly. You're holding for 6 miles per hour. Wind's actually 8. Add another half-inch left hold. He tried again. The group tightened to 1.3 inches. Better keep practicing. The goal isn't perfection today, it's understanding. Perfection comes from repetition. She moved on to the next shooter. Always moving, always observing, always there when someone needed help, but never hovering. Brennan stood to the side, watching, learning. He'd been in the Army 22 years, and he was learning things he'd never been taught. Or maybe he had been taught and hadn't understood the depth beneath the surface. Either way, he was paying attention now. But the midday heat would bring a new challenge, one that would force these young soldiers to become invisible in broad daylight or fail trying. The midday heat was brutal when they transitioned to tactical movement, the kind of heat that made thinking difficult and moving in full gear feel like pushing through water. Elina led them to a section of wooded terrain behind the main training complex. Pine forest, underbrush, uneven ground. Good training environment. Movement under potential observation, she said. Every time you move, you make yourself visible. Motion draws the eye faster than shape or color. Your job is to minimize exposure while maintaining operational tempo. She demonstrated, moving through the underbrush in a low crouch, fluid, economical, using available cover, pausing every few steps. Not random pauses, deliberate, timed. Human eye detects motion in approximately 0.2 seconds, she explained while moving. If you freeze every 3 to 4 steps, you break the motion signature. The observer's eye has to reacquire you. That delay can be the difference between being spotted and remaining invisible. She reached a tree line 30 meters away, turned back. None of them had clearly tracked her the entire way. She'd seemed to fade in and out of visibility despite moving in broad daylight. Your turn, one at a time. I'm the observer. Make it to this tree line without me tracking your entire movement. They tried. Most of them failed badly, too fast. Too much noise, too predictable in their movement patterns. Elina called out every mistake. Noise discipline, your boot just hit that branch, snapped loud enough to hear from 80 meters, watch where you step. Silhouette, you just skylighted yourself on that ridge, visible from half a kilometer, stay below the crest. Predictable movement, you're following the obvious path, that's where the observer expects you to be. Use harder terrain, make them work to predict your route. Travis went fifth. He'd watched the others, learned from their mistakes. He moved deliberately, tested each footfall before committing weight, used vegetation to break up his outline, paused irregularly. Made it 2/3 of the way before Elina called out. Better, but you're breathing too hard, I can hear it from here. Control your breathing, if you can't, you're moving too fast. Slow down. He slowed, focused on his breathing, made it to the tree line. Elina nodded once. Adequate. Do it again, faster this time without sacrificing sound discipline. By noon, half the company could make the movement without being fully tracked. The other half were improving, slowly, painfully, but improving. They broke for chow. MREs eaten in the shade, minimal talking. Everyone too tired, too focused, too absorbed in trying to process everything they were learning. Travis sat slightly apart, notebook open, writing. Elina walked past, saw him, stopped. You're taking notes, she observed. Yes, ma'am. Why? Because I'll forget the details if I don't write them down. What details specifically? He flipped back a page. The mirage reading for wind speed, the reticle math for range estimation, the freeze interval for movement, the angle compensation for uphill shots. He looked up at her. You said this stuff was automatic for you. I want it to be automatic for me. Something flickered in Elina's eyes, not quite approval, more like recognition. Repetition makes it automatic, she said, but understanding makes it adaptable. When conditions change and the formula doesn't work exactly right, understanding lets you adjust. Keep writing, keep practicing, keep thinking. She walked away. Travis watched her go, then wrote one more line in his notebook, understanding before automation. The afternoon would bring them to the most dangerous training environment of all, the place where more soldiers died in combat than any other, the urban battlefield. The afternoon brought a different kind of education. They moved to the MOUT facility, military operations in urban terrain. A collection of buildings designed to simulate civilian structures. Doors, windows, stairwells, hallways, all the things that turned normal movement into potential death traps. Elina stood before the entrance to a 3-story structure. The recruits gathered around her, weapons slung, listening. Urban combat is different, she said. In open terrain, you have space to maneuver, distance to react. In buildings, everything happens fast and close. The average engagement distance in urban combat is less than 50 meters, often much less, 10 meters, 5 meters, sometimes 5 feet. She pointed at the doorway ahead. This is called a fatal funnel, 45-degree cone of vulnerability from the doorway. Anyone inside has a prepared position, cover, concealment, angles. You're entering from an exposed position. They have every advantage. Your job is to minimize that advantage through technique. She demonstrated entry procedures, button hook technique, crisscross, dynamic entry. She moved through each one with precision that spoke of doing it for real when the people on the other side were shooting back with live ammunition. First man enters high right or low left, depending on door orientation. Second man takes opposite. Third centers. Fourth holds security on the door. You call your corners as you clear them. Left clear, right clear, center clear. If you don't call it, it's not clear. Communication is life. They practiced for an hour. Dry runs, no ammunition, just movement and communication and learning not to kill each other through crossfire or negligence. Elina observed everything, corrected small errors that would become big problems under stress. You're bunching up in the doorway, spread out. One man hit by fire shouldn't take down the whole team. You're not pieing the corner before entry. I can see 3/4 of that room from out here if I use the proper angle. Why commit until you know what you're facing? Weapon orientation. Where your eyes go, your muzzle goes. Never separate the two. If you're looking at it, you should be able to shoot it immediately. By 1500 hours, they were running live scenarios with simunition, paint-marking rounds, non-lethal but painful enough to teach the right lessons. Elina played the role of hostile force. One woman against 4-man teams. She destroyed them. First team through the door, she engaged from a position they hadn't cleared properly. 2 hits before they even knew where she was. Second team did better. They pied the corner, saw her position, but hesitated on entry. She punished the hesitation, 1 hit before they could react. Third team was Travis's. He led from the front, pied the corner, saw her position, made a decision. Instead of entering where she expected, he called an audible. Smoke, then flank from the west entrance. Move. They executed, threw smoke grenades through the main door, circled the building, entered from an unexpected angle, found Elina repositioning to cover the original entry point. Travis got paint on her shoulder before she could fully turn and engage. The scenario ended. Elina stood, wiped the paint off her shoulder, looked at Travis. "Why did you flank?" she asked. "Because you had the advantage at the main entry, prepared position, clear sight lines. We couldn't take that away from you by entering where you expected, so we changed the equation. And if I'd had the west entrance covered too, then we'd have reassessed and tried something else, but staying in the fatal funnel was guaranteed to get us killed. Flanking gave us a chance." Elina nodded. "Correct assessment, tactical flexibility is survival. Never commit to a plan that's getting you killed just because it was the original plan. Adapt or die." She looked at the other teams. You all saw what his team did. They used initiative. They changed the scenario. That's what keeps you alive when the plans fall apart, because plans always fall apart. But as the day drew to a close, one recruit's doubt would force Elina to reveal something she'd kept hidden for 28 years, proof that would either validate everything or destroy her credibility forever. The sun was lowering toward the pines when Master Sergeant Brennan called them back to the main training yard. They formed up exhausted, covered in sweat and paint residue, but different than they'd been that morning. Sharper, more aware, starting to understand that competence wasn't about being tough or aggressive. It was about being smart and adaptable and willing to learn. Brennan stood before them, Elina beside him. "Secure weapons, return to barracks, chow at 1800. After evening formation, we'll have a briefing on tomorrow's final exercise." He paused. "You did good work today. Keep it up." They dispersed, moving with the kind of tired satisfaction that came from being pushed hard and meeting the standard. Travis lingered, waited until the others had cleared the area, then approached Elina. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" She looked at him. "Yes. The tattoo, Black Viper. Colonel Vaughn said it was CIA duty, that you were 17 in Kuwait, that most operators didn't survive." He paused, choosing words carefully. "How did you make it out when so many others didn't?" Elina was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something distant, something Travis couldn't see. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "I made it out because someone better than me didn't. Because my team leader used her body to shield me from a grenade, because I was small enough to fit in spaces they couldn't, because I got lucky in ways that had nothing to do with skill." She looked at him. Survival isn't always about being the best. Sometimes it's about being the one the universe arbitrarily decides to spare. But you learned from it. I learned that every breath after that moment was borrowed time, that I owed a debt I could never fully repay. So I do what I can, I pass on what I learned, I try to make sure the next generation doesn't make the same mistakes we did. Travis nodded slowly. Thank you for being here, ma'am. Thank you for paying attention. Most people don't. She turned and walked toward the parking area. Travis watched her go, then headed for the barracks. Inside, the mood was different. Most recruits were exhausted, processing the day's lessons, but 3 of them sat in a tight circle at the far end of the bay, whispering. Travis noticed but didn't think much of it until one of them called out. "Bennett, got a minute?" Private Lucas Hammond. 21, former college wrestler, thick neck, thicker attitude. He'd been one of the loudest mockers on day 1, one of the quietest learners since. Travis walked over. "What's up?" Hammond lowered his voice. "That black viper thing, the tattoo, you buy it. What do you mean?" "I mean, come on, 17-year-old girl in special ops in 1991, before women were even allowed in combat." Hammond shook his head. "Sounds like bullshit to me, some contractor trying to sound cool with a fake story." Another recruit, Parker, nodded. "I looked it up during Chow. Black Viper program, nothing online. Not even on conspiracy theory forums. If it was real, there'd be something." "Classified programs don't have Wikipedia pages," Travis said quietly. "Or," Hammond leaned in, "it never existed and she's playing us. Maybe she was military, sure, maybe she can shoot, but this whole I was a teenage super soldier thing, that's Hollywood, not history." Travis felt anger rising. "Colonel Vaughn confirmed it, you calling him a liar." "I'm saying maybe she fooled him too. That tattoo could be from anywhere." Desert Storm happened. She could have been support personnel, got the ink to feel cool, and built a legend around it over the years. Hammond's voice hardened. "I'm not saying she's not good. I'm saying I don't believe the story, and I don't think we should treat her like some kind of ghost operator when she might just be another contractor padding her resume." Before Travis could respond, a voice cut through from the barracks doorway. "You want proof?" Everyone turned. Elina stood there. How long had she been listening? Her face was unreadable. She walked into the bay, stopped in front of Hammond. "You want proof the story's real?" Hammond stood, matched her height, doubled her weight. "Yeah, I do." Elina pulled out her phone, scrolled, turned the screen toward them. A photograph, black and white, desert camouflage, 6 people. One of them was unmistakably Elina, younger, scared, trying to look brave. Next to her, a woman with captain's bars, Major Rebecca Summers, before her promotion. Kuwait City, February 15th, 1991, 4 days before the ground invasion. Elina's voice was flat. "That's my team. 4 of them died on that mission. 1 survived paralyzed. I survived with 2 bullet wounds and enough guilt to last a lifetime." She swiped to another photo, a military citation, heavily redacted but clearly showing her name, the date, and the words "Classified Operation Presidential Authorization." "You want more proof?" Elina asked. "I can call Vaughn. He'll show you his matching tattoo, different design, same meaning, or you can keep doubting and waste everyone's time." Hammond stared at the photos. His face changed from skepticism to something else. Shame, maybe. I'm sorry, ma'am, I was out of line." Elina pocketed her phone. "You weren't wrong to question. Blind faith gets people killed. Verify before you trust. That's good instinct." She looked at each of them. "But when someone like Colonel Vaughn vouches for something, that's verification enough. He's earned that trust over decades. I've earned it over 3 days. Decide for yourself who you believe." She turned to leave, stopped at the door. "Tomorrow's exercise will answer any remaining doubts. If I can't perform, then question everything. Until then, get some sleep. You'll need it." She left. The barracks was silent for a long moment. Then Hammond sat down heavily on his bunk. "Well," he said quietly, "I feel like an asshole." "You should," Travis said, then softer, "but at least now you know she's the real thing." Parker was still staring at where Elina had stood. "Did you see those photos? She looked like a kid, younger than us." "She was," Travis said, "and she survived what killed most of her team. That's who's teaching us." He walked back to his bunk, opened his notebook, added one more line, question everything, but when the answers come from blood and scars, believe them. He closed the notebook, lay back on his rack, stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow was the final exercise, whatever that meant. But he felt more prepared now than he had 48 hours ago. Not because he was stronger or faster, because he understood things he hadn't understood before, about weapons, about tactics, about the difference between looking competent and being competent. Outside, Elina Crawford sat alone in her truck, making a decision that would test everything she'd taught them, and force her to watch as these young soldiers learned the hardest lesson of all, that knowing what to do and doing it under fire were two completely different things. Outside in her truck, Elina sat in the parking lot for a moment. She hadn't planned to show them the photos. Hadn't wanted to, but Hammond's doubt was legitimate. Healthy, even. Soldiers who questioned were soldiers who stayed alive. She checked her gear one last time. Tomorrow would test everything, not just the recruits, her too. She'd have to guide them through chaos without taking over, watch them struggle without intervening. Let them learn lessons that might hurt. That was the hardest part. Watching people make mistakes when you knew how to prevent them, but prevention wasn't teaching. Pain was teaching. Failure was teaching. She could show them the path, but they had to walk it themselves. She drove toward her temporary housing, a small apartment off base, anonymous, temporary, like everything in her life had been since 1991. Never staying long, never putting down roots, always ready to move. The habits of deep cover died hard. Tomorrow would bring the final test. She didn't know what Brennan had planned, but she knew it would push the recruits, force them to apply everything they'd learned under pressure, show them what they were really made of when the comfortable classroom environment disappeared. That was fine. That was necessary. You didn't learn your real limits in a classroom. You learned them when everything was falling apart and you had to make decisions with incomplete information and zero margin for error. She'd learned her limits in Kuwait, in the dark, under fire, watching people she cared about die while she lived. The hardest classroom in the world. If she could spare these kids even a fraction of that pain, the trip to Fort Benning was worth it. She parked, climbed out of the truck, walked to her apartment. Inside, she sat at the small kitchen table and opened a folder she kept in her backpack. Inside were photographs, black and white. Desert camouflage, 6 faces. Major Rebecca Summers, team leader. Survived the mission but paralyzed for life. Died in 2014. Sergeant Nathan Pierce, breacher. Killed by grenade, Kuwait City, February 1991. Corporal David Chen, communications. Killed by small arms fire, Kuwait City, February 1991. Specialist Angela Torres, medic. Killed by RPG, Kuwait City, February 1991. Private First Class Ryan Mitchell, sniper. Killed covering the team's extraction, Kuwait City, February 1991. And one more face. 17 years old, scared eyes trying to look brave. Elina Crawford, scout, survived. She looked at those faces for a long time, remembering voices, remembering jokes told in safe houses and arguments over mission planning and the quiet moments before insertion when everyone dealt with fear in their own way. "I'm keeping the promise, Major," she said to Summers' photograph. "Teaching them what you taught me. That quiet competence beats loud aggression. That understanding beats strength. That thinking keeps you alive when bullets and bravado get you killed." She closed the folder, put it away, made herself a simple meal, ate without tasting it, cleaned up, prepared for tomorrow. At 2100 hours, she lay down in the narrow bed and closed her eyes. Sleep came reluctantly, like always, bringing dreams of desert sand and the sound of gunfire and the weight of Rebecca Summers' body pressed against her, shield against the blast, paying the price so a 17-year-old girl could live. She woke at 3:30, covered in sweat, heart pounding, the same nightmare she'd had for 28 years. She got up, showered, dressed, made coffee, sat at the table, and waited for dawn. At 500, her phone buzzed, text message from Brennan. Final exercise today. Force on force. 6-hour scenario in woodland terrain. OPFOR team hunting recruits. You're with them. They succeed, they graduate. They fail, they recycle. Are you ready? She texted back one word, yes, because she was. Because this was what Summers had asked her to do. Teach them. Prepare them. Give them the tools to survive when the universe stopped being kind and started being honest about how hard the world really was. She finished her coffee, grabbed her gear, drove back to Fort Benning through the pre-dawn darkness. The sun was just touching the horizon when she pulled through the gate. The guard waved her through without checking ID. He recognized her truck now, recognized her. She parked and walked to the training yard. Alpha Company was already forming up. 24 faces, less cocky than they'd been 2 days ago, more serious, more aware. Travis Bennett saw her first, nodded slightly. She nodded back. Brennan appeared from the command building, walked to the front of the formation, looked at them with an expression that said today was going to test everything they'd learned and most of what they thought they knew about themselves. Today is the final exercise, he said. Everything you've learned gets put to the test. No classroom, no do-overs, just you, the terrain, and a very motivated opposing force that wants to hunt you down. He paused. Ms. Crawford will be with you as an observer and advisor. Listen to her. Learn from her, execute with precision. Another pause, let them feel the weight of it. If you fail today, you recycle. Start this entire training cycle over from the beginning. If you succeed, you graduate and move on to advanced infantry training. One more pause. The choice is yours. The standard is non-negotiable. Are we clear? Yes, Sergeant. Outstanding. Load up. We move out in 15 minutes. They scattered to prepare, checking gear, loading magazines with simunition, making last-minute adjustments to equipment. Elina stood to the side, watching, waiting, thinking about Kuwait, about missions that went wrong, about the difference between training and reality, and how small that gap really was when you stripped away all the safety measures and backup plans. Today, these kids would learn something important. That competence under controlled conditions didn't guarantee competence under pressure. That knowing what to do and doing it when your heart was pounding and your hands were shaking and everything was falling apart were two completely different things. She hoped they were ready, but hope was a poor strategy. All she could do was be there, guide them, show them the way if they were willing to follow. The trucks rolled up, tailgates dropped. They loaded in. Elina climbed aboard last, found a spot near the back, settled in for the ride to the training area. Travis sat across from her. Their eyes met. He looked nervous but determined. Good. Fear that made you careful was useful. Fear that made you freeze got you killed. The trucks rumbled through the gates and out into the Georgia wilderness, carrying them toward whatever test Brennan had designed. Toward the moment where everything they'd learned would either prove sufficient or reveal itself as inadequate. Elina settled into silence, the familiar weight of summer's compass around her neck, a quiet reminder of promises kept. I'm ready, she whispered to herself, to the ghost, to the future that was rushing toward them in the back of a military truck on a Georgia morning. Let's see if they are too. The truck stopped in a clearing 30 kilometers from Fort Benning. Dense Georgia pine forest on all sides, the kind of terrain that looked simple on a map but turned into a maze once you were inside it. Uneven ground, heavy underbrush, limited sight lines, perfect for what Brennan had planned. Alpha Company dismounted. 24 recruits moving with the nervous energy of people who knew something hard was coming but didn't know exactly what. Elina stepped down last, observing their movements. Some checked weapons immediately. Good. Others stood around waiting for instructions. Less good. Brennan gathered them in the clearing. Behind him, 5 men in full tactical gear stood near a second vehicle. Experienced NCOs, hard faces, the kind of men who'd done real combat and knew how to make training hurt just enough to teach without actually injuring. This is your opposing force, Brennan announced. They have one mission, hunt you down and eliminate you. You have one mission, evade them for 6 hours and reach the extraction point. He pulled out a map, pointed to a location marked in red. 12 kilometers northeast, small clearing marked with orange panels. Make it there by 1400 hours, you pass. Get captured or eliminated, you fail. He let that sink in. Rules of engagement, simunition only, hits to the torso or head count as kills, limb shots count as wounds, 3 wounds equal 1 kill. If you're killed, you sit where you fall until the exercise ends. If you're wounded, you can continue, but you have to simulate the injury. Got it? Yes, Sergeant. OPFOR has weapons, vehicles, communications, and a 30-minute head start to set up their hunting pattern. You have what you're carrying, your training, and Ms. Crawford as an advisor. Brennan looked at Elina. She observes, she advises if you ask. She does not fight for you. This is your test, not hers. Elina nodded once. Brennan checked his watch. It's 800 now. OPFOR moves out. You wait here for 30 minutes, then you're released. Use that time wisely. Plan your route. Assign responsibilities. Figure out how you're going to survive the next 6 hours. The OPFOR team loaded into their vehicle and disappeared into the forest. The sound of the engine faded. Silence rushed back in, just wind in the pines and the sound of 24 people trying to control their breathing. Travis Bennett stepped forward, looked at the other recruits. We need a plan. Who's got land nav experience? 3 hands went up. He pointed to one. Your primary navigator. Plot us a route that uses terrain for concealment. Avoid obvious paths. He pointed to 2 others. Your point and rear security. Eyes out at all times. Signal if you see anything. The recruits were looking at him like they weren't sure why he was giving orders. He was a PFC, same rank as most of them, but Elina had noticed something. He'd been the one paying attention, taking notes, asking questions. Sometimes competence chose you before rank did. Why should we listen to you? Someone asked. Not hostile, just uncertain. Travis looked at Elina, then back at them. Because she taught us that thinking keeps you alive, so we're going to think. Anyone have a better plan? Speak up now. Silence. Good, let's use this time to prepare. They spread out the map, started planning. Elina stood back, watching, not interfering. This was their test. She was just here to make sure the lessons stuck when pressure turned thinking into panic. The 30 minutes passed quickly. Brennan's voice came over a radio he'd left with them. Time's up. You're released. Good luck. They moved out. Navigator in front with compass and map. Point man 15 meters ahead. Rear security 20 meters back. The rest in a loose column with 5-meter intervals. Not perfect, but better than the cluster they would have been 3 days ago. Elina moved with them to the side, offset from the main group, observing. They were trying to apply what she'd taught them, using terrain, watching their noise discipline, moving deliberately instead of rushing. For the first hour, it went well. They covered 3 kilometers without contact. The navigator was good, choosing routes that used depressions and tree lines for concealment. They were staying off ridgelines, avoiding open areas, thinking. Then the first shot cracked through the forest. A recruit 20 meters from Elina jerked and grabbed his shoulder. Orange paint bloomed across his uniform. He'd been hit from a position they hadn't seen, hadn't anticipated. The OPFOR had set up an ambush and they'd walked right into it. Contact front, someone yelled. The column dissolved. Some dove for cover, others froze. A few actually tried to return fire without identifying the target, exactly what Elina had taught them not to do. More shots, 2 more hits. Orange paint marking kills. Travis's voice cut through the chaos. Cease fire, break contact. Fall back to that depression 30 meters rear. Some listened. Others were still trying to shoot at an enemy they couldn't see, getting themselves killed in the process. Elina watched it unfold, wanted to intervene. Didn't. This was the lesson. This was where they learned whether the classroom knowledge transferred to pressure. Finally, they broke contact, pulled back, regrouped in the depression. 3 killed, 2 wounded, breathing hard, eyes wide with the adrenaline dump that came from sudden violence even when it was simulated. Travis looked at Elina. We screwed that up. Yes, she said simply. What should we have done? What do you think you should have done? He was quiet for a moment, thinking, not reacting. Good. Point Man should have been scanning better. We should have identified the ambush site before we entered it. Once contact was made, we should have suppressed and flanked instead of just breaking contact. Elina nodded. Correct assessment, but breaking contact was the right call given how badly you were positioned. Sometimes survival means recognizing you're beaten and getting out before the situation deteriorates further. So we failed. You learned. That's different than failing. She paused. Now move. OPFOR knows where you are. They'll be repositioning to cut off your retreat. That got them moving. But the next 2 hours would push them harder than anything they'd experienced, and force Travis Bennett to make a decision that would either save them all or get everyone killed. They adjusted formation, put more distance between elements, started actually using the techniques she'd taught them instead of just going through the motions. The second hour was better. They avoided 2 more ambush sites by reading terrain better, spotting the places OPFOR would logically set up, choosing alternate routes even when it cost them time. But the clock was working against them. 12 kilometers in 6 hours should have been easy. But evasion wasn't about speed. It was about not being found. Every time they had to detour around a potential ambush, they lost time. Every time they had to move slowly to maintain noise discipline, the extraction point stayed distant. At hour 3, they were only 7 kilometers from start, 5 kilometers from extraction. 3 hours remaining. The math was getting tight. They stopped in a dense thicket for a water break. 18 recruits remaining. 6 had been eliminated. Morale was starting to crack around the edges. Elina could see it in their faces, the doubt creeping in. The voice that said maybe they weren't good enough. Maybe they should have trained harder. Maybe they were going to fail. Travis saw it too. He stood up, looked at them. Listen up, we're behind schedule. We've lost people. OPFOR is hunting us hard, but we're still in this. We've got 3 hours to cover 5 kilometers. That's doable if we stay smart and stay together. Easy for you to say, someone muttered. You haven't been hit yet. None of us still here have been hit because we adapted. That adaptation runs out if we stop thinking. Travis pulled out the map. New plan, we've been avoiding the obvious routes. That's smart. But OPFOR expects that now. They're setting up on the alternate routes, so we're going to do something they won't expect. What? We're going to take the most obvious route straight up this ridgeline, fast and aggressive. They'll be positioned on the flanks, expecting us to avoid the high ground. By the time they realize we're on the ridge, we'll be past them. Elina almost smiled. He'd learned, taken the principle of adaptive thinking, and applied it to a situation where conventional tactics weren't working. The question was whether the others would follow. That's crazy, someone said. Maybe, but we're losing if we keep doing what we're doing. At least this gives us a chance. Travis looked at Elina. Ma'am, is this stupid? She considered. It's risky. High ground makes you visible, but if OPFOR is positioned for a conventional evasion pattern, they won't be looking at the ridge. Speed and surprise might work. Might? Welcome to tactical decision-making. There are no guarantees, just calculated risks. Travis nodded, looked at the others. We're doing it. Anyone who doesn't want to follow can wait here and surrender when OPFOR finds them. Everyone else on your feet. We move in 2 minutes. They moved up the ridge, faster than before, sacrificing some noise discipline for speed. It was a gamble. Elina knew it. Travis knew it. The question was whether it would pay off. For 20 minutes it worked. They covered ground fast. The ridge provided good sightlines. They could see potential threats before walking into them. OPFOR was visible in the low ground, positioned exactly where Travis had predicted, expecting them to come through the valleys. Then the terrain changed. The ridge narrowed, trees closed in, sightlines collapsed, and suddenly they were in another kill zone. This time the OPFOR had predicted the unpredictable. They'd positioned one team on the ridge itself, waiting, patient. The first shot hit the point man. The second hit the navigator, orange paint. 2 more kills, but this time the recruits didn't freeze, they reacted. Suppressive fire toward the enemy position, immediate movement to cover, Travis's voice calling out commands. Flanking team left side, suppression team maintain fire, everyone else prepare to move on my mark. They executed, not perfectly but competently. The flanking team moved through the trees, got an angle on the OPFOR position, laid down fire that forced the enemy to displace. Move, move, move! The main group bounded forward, using the suppression to cover their advance, actually applying the fire and movement principles Elina had taught them. They broke through the ambush, lost 2 more people, but kept moving, kept pushing. The extraction point was 3 kilometers ahead, 2 hours remaining. Elina watched them with something that might have been pride if she allowed herself that emotion. They were learning under fire, under pressure, adapting, thinking, refusing to quit even when things went wrong. That was what Summers had asked her to teach. Not tactics, not marksmanship, but the mindset that kept you fighting when the easy answer was to give up. But the 4th hour would bring their greatest challenge yet, and force Travis to make a decision that would either prove him a leader or reveal him as just another soldier following orders. The 4th hour brought new challenges. OPFOR had vehicles. They could hear the engines now getting closer. The hunters were adjusting their pattern, tightening the noose. "They're going to cut us off from the extraction point," Travis said. "We need to move faster," Elina said quietly, "or smarter." He looked at her. "What do you mean? You're thinking like prey being chased, reacting to their movements. What if you stopped being prey and started being something else?" Understanding dawned in his eyes. "We ambush them. It's your call, but yes, that's an option." Travis gathered the remaining 14 recruits, explained the plan. Some looked at him like he was insane. Most looked desperate enough to try anything. They set up in a natural choke point, a narrow section where the ridge forced movement through a confined space. Classic ambush terrain. Half the team on one side, half on the other, overlapping fields of fire. Then they waited. Elina positioned herself where she could observe but not interfere. This was their test, their decision, their execution. The sound of an engine grew louder. The OPFOR vehicle appeared, 4 men inside, confident, hunting, not expecting to become the hunted. Travis let them enter the kill zone, waited until they were fully committed, then gave the command. Fire! 14 weapons opened up. Simunition rounds impacted the vehicle and the men inside. Orange paint everywhere. The OPFOR team didn't even have time to react before they were marked as casualties. The vehicle stopped. The OPFOR team leader climbed out, looked at the paint on his chest, then at the recruits positioned on both sides. He started laughing. "Well played, kids. Didn't see that coming." Travis stepped out from cover. "Thank you, Sergeant. How many of you are left?" "Just 1 more team, 2 men between you and the extraction point." The OPFOR sergeant grinned. "But they know you're coming now and they're the best we've got." "Understood, thanks for the intel." "Wasn't intel, was respect. You earned it." The sergeant looked at Elina. "She teaching them to think like that?" "She's teaching them to think," Travis said. "What we do with it is on us." The OPFOR sergeant nodded, climbed back in his vehicle, drove off to wait for the exercise to end. The recruits were energized now. They'd turned the tables, proven they could adapt. But Elina knew the hardest part was still ahead. The last 2 OPFOR members would be waiting at the extraction point, prepared, dug in, ready, 1 kilometer to go, 90 minutes remaining. They moved carefully now, every step measured, every sightline checked, expecting contact at any moment. It came when they were 500 meters from the extraction point, not an ambush, a blocking position. 2 OPFOR members in hardened cover with overlapping fields of fire, covering the only approach to the clearing. Travis called a halt, gathered the team, looked at the situation. "We can't go around, not enough time, we have to go through." "They'll cut us apart," someone said. "Maybe, unless we give them something else to think about." He outlined the plan, risky, aggressive, the kind of thing that would either work brilliantly or fail spectacularly. Elina listened, said nothing. This was their test. They split into 3 elements: suppression team, flanking team, assault team. Textbook combined arms tactics for squad-level attack. The kind of thing they'd learned in theory but never executed under pressure. The suppression team opened up first, laying fire on the OPFOR position, not trying to hit them, just making them keep their heads down. The flanking team moved through dense underbrush, slow, quiet, getting an angle on the position from the left side. The assault team waited, tension building. Breathing controlled, weapons ready. Elina watched it unfold like a symphony, not perfect but coordinated, thought out, executed with the kind of tactical sense that separated soldiers from armed civilians. The flanking team got in position, radioed ready. Travis gave the command. Flank team fire, assault team move. Both elements opened up simultaneously. The OPFOR members were caught in a crossfire, tried to shift position. Got hit with orange paint from the assault team charging straight up the middle, both marked as casualties. The clearing was clear. The recruits rushed forward, reached the orange panels marking the extraction point. 13 of them had made it. 11 lost along the way, but they'd made it. 1350 hours, 10 minutes ahead of schedule. They collapsed in the clearing, breathing hard, some laughing, some too exhausted to do anything but lie there and stare at the sky. The adrenaline was draining out of them now, leaving behind the bone-deep fatigue that came after sustained tactical movement under stress. Travis sat down next to Elina. "We did it." "You did it," she corrected. "I just watched. You taught us how the tactics, the thinking, the mindset." He looked at her. "Without that, we'd have failed in the first hour." "Maybe, but knowing what to do and doing it are different things. You made the calls, you led them, you adapted when the plan didn't work." "That was all you." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that what it was like for you, in Kuwait?" Elina looked out at the forest, remembering different terrain, different stakes. "Kuwait was different. We didn't have backup coming if things went wrong. We didn't have safety officers watching to make sure nobody actually got hurt. When we got hit, people died for real." She paused. "But the principles were the same. Think, adapt, never quit. The people who did that survived, the ones who didn't." "Didn't? How do you live with that? Surviving when others didn't?" "You don't live with it, you live because of it. You honor their sacrifice by becoming someone worth the price they paid, by passing on what they taught you, by making sure their deaths meant something." The sound of vehicles approaching ended the conversation. Brennan's truck rolled into the clearing. Stepped out, looked at the 13 recruits, at the 11 empty spots in the formation, at the orange paint marking casualties and the exhaustion marking survivors. "Report," he said to Travis. Travis stood, gave a concise after-action summary. Initial contact, casualties, tactical decisions, the ambush they'd set, the final assault, clear, professional, the kind of brief an NCO would give. Brennan listened without interrupting. When Travis finished, he nodded once. "You took 11 casualties. That's a 46% loss rate. In a real operation, that would be catastrophic." He paused, let them feel the weight of that. "But you also adapted under fire, made tactical decisions, executed a successful ambush against experienced opposition, and you reached your objective ahead of schedule despite being outnumbered and outgunned." He looked at each of them. "That's the difference between adequate and effective. Adequate soldiers follow the plan. Effective soldiers adapt when the plan fails. You proved today you can be effective. That's what we needed to see." He turned to Elina. "What's your assessment?" "They learned," Elina said simply. "They applied training under pressure. They made mistakes and corrected them. They thought instead of just reacting. That's all you can ask." Brennan nodded. "Load up. We're heading back to base. After chow, there will be a formal debrief and graduation ceremony." He almost smiled. "You earned it, all of you." But the journey back would bring one final lesson, one that would haunt Travis Bennett through every firefight he'd face for the rest of his military career. The ride back was quieter than the ride out. Exhaustion and relief mixing together. Some slept. Others stared out at the passing forest, processing, remembering, learning from the experience while it was still fresh. Elina sat in her usual spot near the tailgate, Travis across from her. He was writing in his notebook again, even now, even exhausted, capturing the lessons before they faded. "What are you writing?" she asked. He looked up. Everything I learned today, the mistakes we made, the things that worked, how it felt different from training, how pressure changes decision-making. He paused. You said understanding makes things adaptable. I'm trying to understand what just happened while I still remember it clearly. That's good. Most people forget the lessons as soon as the pressure is off. They remember they survived, but not why they survived. The details get lost. Did you do that after Kuwait? I did, still do. Every mission, every engagement, I write it down, study it, try to understand what worked and what didn't. After 28 years, I have notebooks full of lessons. She looked at him. Most of them say the same thing in different ways. Think, adapt, never quit. The tactics change, the weapons change, the technology changes, but those three principles never do. The trucks rolled through Fort Bennying's gates at 1600 hours. The sun was lowering toward evening. The heat was finally breaking. The recruits dismounted, stiff and sore, but proud of what they'd accomplished. Brennan gave them 2 hours to clean weapons, shower, and prepare for the ceremony. They dispersed to the barracks. Elina walked toward her truck. Brennan stopped her. "A word, ma'am?" She turned. "Yes." "What you did here, what you taught them, that goes beyond standard curriculum." He looked uncomfortable, like he was about to say something that didn't come easily. "I've been doing this 22 years. I thought I knew how to train soldiers, but watching you work, I realized I've been teaching them to follow procedures. You taught them to think. That's different. That's better. You would have gotten there eventually. You're a good instructor. Maybe. But maybe not before some of them died learning lessons the hard way." He paused. "Colonel Vaughn told me about Black Viper, about what that program was, what it cost. I can't imagine what you went through, but I'm grateful you came back to share it." Elina nodded. "Major Summers asked me to. I'm just keeping a promise. She must have been remarkable." "She was. She saved my life and then spent 23 years teaching me how to deserve it. This is me passing that forward." Brennan extended his hand. "Thank you for being here, for teaching them, for making them better than they were." She shook it. "They did the work, I just showed them the way." She climbed into her truck, started the engine, sat there for a moment collecting her thoughts. The exercise had gone well, the recruits had learned. Travis, in particular, had shown real leadership potential, the kind that came from thinking instead of just reacting. The ceremony that evening was formal, dress uniforms. Families in attendance, Colonel Vaughn presiding. The 11 recruits who'd been eliminated in the exercise still graduated. They'd learned as much from failure as the survivors had from success. Elina stood in the back, out of the way, observing. She didn't need recognition, didn't want it. This was their moment, their achievement. Vaughn called each recruit forward, handed them their certificates, shook their hands. When Travis's turn came, Vaughn held on to the handshake an extra moment. "I hear you led them well out there, son." "I just applied what I was taught, sir." "That's what good leaders do. Keep it up." After the ceremony, families swarmed the graduates, pictures, congratulations, pride and relief mixing together. Elina slipped out, walked to her truck. She'd done what she came to do, time to disappear back into the quiet life she'd built. "Ma'am, wait!" She turned. Travis was jogging across the parking lot. He stopped, caught his breath. "I wanted to thank you before you left. For everything you taught us." "You're welcome. Can I ask you one more thing?" "Yes." "The compass you wear around your neck, what's the significance?" Elina reached up, touched the brass through her shirt. "It belonged to Major Summers. She gave it to me in Kuwait, said as long as I had it, I'd always find my way home. After she died, her family gave it back to me. I've carried it ever since." She paused, as a reminder, as a promise that I'd do what she asked, teach the next generation. Make sure her sacrifice meant something. She looked at him. "You have potential, Bennett, real leadership ability. Don't waste it. Don't let ego override judgment. Think first, act second. Take care of your people." "I will, ma'am, I promise." She nodded, climbed into her truck, started to close the door. He stopped her. "Ma'am, one more thing. That tattoo, Black Viper, you said 31 survived out of 97. Are there others, other survivors?" "There's one, Colonel Vaughn. He was Viper 6, different cell, different operations, but same program." She paused. "Everyone else is gone, dead, or disappeared. It's just us now." Will you stay? Keep teaching. Elina shook her head. This was a favor for the colonel for Major Summers' memory, but I don't stay anywhere long, old habits. Where will you go? Somewhere quiet, Montana maybe, teach high school shop class, build things with my hands, normal life. After everything you've done, you want normal. After everything I've done, normal is all I want. She closed the door, drove toward the gate. In her rearview mirror, she saw Travis standing in the parking lot, watching her leave, learning his last lesson from her, that you didn't need recognition or glory or fame. You just needed to do the work and walk away. She drove through the gate, past the guard who waved without checking ID, out onto the highway that led away from Fort Benning, away from the military, back toward whatever came next. Her phone buzzed, text from Vaughn, thank you for everything. Summers would be proud. She texted back, I kept the promise, that's all that matters. Another text came through, will you come back if we need you? She thought about that, about promises and debts and the things we owe to people who save us. About 28 years of living with survivor's guilt and trying to make it mean something. If you need me, she typed, I'll be there. She put the phone away, drove into the gathering darkness. Somewhere in Montana, there was a quiet town. A high school that needed a shop teacher. Students who needed to learn that building things with your hands was its own kind of warfare against chaos and entropy. That's where she'd go, for now, until the next call came, until someone else needed teaching, until another promise needed keeping, because that's what Black Viper operators did. They survived. They adapted. They passed on the knowledge. And when the world was quiet again, they disappeared back into the silence that had always been their greatest weapon. 3 months later, Syria, Travis Bennett's platoon was pinned down by enemy fire. His lieutenant froze, Travis didn't. He used fire and movement, flanked the position, saved his team. In the after-action report, they asked where he'd learned to adapt under pressure. Fort Benning, he said. Advanced training. He didn't mention Elina's name, didn't need to. In his personal notebook, locked away, he'd written, Elina Crawford, Black Viper, taught me that silence proves more than shouting. She saved my life by teaching me how to save myself. I'll pass it on like she passed it to me. In Montana, Elina taught shop class. A student asked about her tattoo one day. A promise to someone important, she said, nothing more. At night, she touched the compass, whispered to the ghost of Summers. Still keeping the promise, Major, still teaching them what quiet looks like. The compass pointed north, always north. The direction that meant home, the direction that meant peace, silent proof, the only proof that ever mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more incredible stories waiting on your screen. If this one hit you, tap to watch the next, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Oh, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where you're watching from.